Okay, so today we are going to discuss one of again another book that is very revolutionary book, which is Capital in the 21st Century. This book basically was published by Thomas Piketty, and it is published from Harvard University Press in 2014. And I have tried my best to summarize the content of this book. Um, and it is one of the book that gained popularity, like anything, because of its ideas, because of the questions that they have put in the book. So let me tell you a little bit about this book before we begin discussing it further. So the name of this book, as I discussed, is Capital in the 21st Century, and it is written by Thomas Piketty. Thomas Piketty is basically a French economist, and he has spent, over 15 years just collecting the data from over 20 countries to answer, one simple question that is the core of this book. And the question is that why does wealth keep going to same few people, and is this getting worse? So this is basically the main idea of this book. For example, if we relate this book to the Pakistani context, and you open the newspaper on any day, you will see that the same 5 or 10 family groups, there could be the Sharif's group, the Dawood's group, the Nishad group, or the Mansha family. Now they keep getting richer every year. So meanwhile, people like us, they are earning in some fixed amount of rupees, and our wealth is almost constant. So why is it so that the people who are very rich, they keep on getting richer day by day, and the people who are in the middle class or in the lower class, or even even if they are in the lower portion of higher class, they're suffering. So this book explains exactly that why this happens by using 300 years of data. So I think let's begin with this book. So now Piketty is somebody who's not a very conventional economist. He's somebody who has a strong grip on data. So he and his colleagues went through so the governmental data on particularly tax records, on state records, and on national accounts for specific countries. Those countries included France, Britain, America, Germany, and Japan. And they using that data, they went all the way back to 1700s in some cases, and then they have come up with this book. So this is very important book. And before you start reading this book, you will realize that most economists were just guessing about this inequality trends. So they had opinions, but not some solid numbers that are going back to centuries. So Piketty basically changed all that. He built the world top income database, uh, and that is just similar to Wikipedia of income inequality. That is data across the world. So this book was originally written in French, interestingly, and when it came out in English in 2014, it became the bestseller. So I remember, when I was doing my bachelor's, and in 2014, the first time I saw this book was in the hand of my teacher, Professor Dr. Akmal Hussain, while I was taking, the course of institutional economics. So he just, came. So he has a habit that whenever he used to come to the lecture, he used to have, some kind of book in his hand. And now I realize that, it was basically, he used to do it deliberately because students actually, those students are very keen to learn. They always used to look at which book he has in his hand. We used to, buy that book and read it. So this is the first time, in class lecture that that I have seen this book in his hand. So I just, I went to buy it, and unfortunately, it was very expensive at that moment. So after a year or so, I was able to buy it. But this was, in 2014, this book actually became the bestseller for the work that has been done in this book. So let me tell you that this book, got so much popularity that, even on those time, Barack Obama was also reading it. So, there are pictures of, him reading this book as well. So, question is that, it explains something that everybody can feel, but nobody could cope with it. And this book has done it. And the question that, that is the core of this book is that the rich are getting richer. And this is not an accident. This is, a product of some things which will be discussed further in book. And hence this book is very important. So this one sentence is the entire book. And let me explain it. But let me first read what the slide says. That when the rate of return on capital exceeds the rate of growth of output and income, as it did in the 19th century and seems quite likely to do again in the 21st, capitalism automatically generates arbitrary and unsustainable inequality that radically undermine the meritocratic values on which democratic societies are based. So, if you just imagine Pakistan's economy growing at, 5% per year, which it is not, but let's assume that it has a decent 5% per year growth rate, that means that the total wealth of countries goes up to 5%, right? So now imagine, some feudal landlord whose land is giving him returns of 10% per year. This means that his wealth doubles every 7 years, while the overall economy is only growing at 5%. So basically, this 5% is capturing, the extraordinary wealth gains from the rich class, but it's also, taking the effect of the people whose income has not increased so much. So the net is actually 5%. The point is that, the share that the rich class get is quite larger. And although they're very few in number, but their share is quite larger. So it gives, a perception that the economy is going well. So in that case, per capita incomes gives us the right picture of what really the growth scenario is. So what happens over the time is that, the landlord's share of total pie keeps getting bigger and bigger, even without him doing anything. So he's just sitting on his land, and his children are inheriting his land. The children inherit it, so obviously because of, the transfer of wealth from one generation to another generation. But meanwhile, the common person like us, the farmer, the factory worker, or even the clerk in the government, their income only grows as fast as the overall economy, which is quite slower. This is what the idea of this is actually what the idea of Piketty means, that when your money makes more money, then the economy grows. Inequalities basically automatically increase. And it is not because of corruption or a bad luck, but it is the basic mathematics of capitalism. And Piketty says that this is what was happening in the 1800s. And it was briefly interrupted by, some wars or the policies of 1900s. But now we see that it is coming back strongly in 2000s. So let us talk about, this R and G. And these are just two letters, but they explain, everything that is, written in this book. R stands for the rates of capital, which exceeds, the economic growth rate, which is G, while the wealth accelerates. So R is basically the return on capital. Let me explain it a bit. For example, if you own a plot in THA Lahore and its value goes up 10% per year, and you are also earning rental income of 5%, your total return is around 15%. So if you have, shares in agro corporation and they give you some dividends, plus the share prices also rises, that return might be 8 to 12% per year, and that is the R. So G is how fast the economy grows. Pakistan GDP growth rate has been around 3 to 4% in the recent years. Sometimes very rarely, but higher, and sometimes again very rarely, but it also got negative. On average, for mature economies, G is around 1 to 2% in real terms, particularly, after serious episodes of inflation. So now the key point is that when R, which is the 15%, uh, let's assume for the DH plot owner, it is much bigger than G, which is 4% for the overall economy. So the plot owner's wealth grows much faster than everyone else combined. So he gets a bigger and bigger share of the total pie. Not because he has worked hard, but just because he had the capital. So in Pakistan, we see that the families who own agriculture land in Punjab and let's assume Sindh, some of them have owned the same land for generations. So their value keeps rising. The tenant farmers who are working basically uh, uh, working on that land basically earns a fixed wage. So every year, the landowner becomes relatively richer and the tenant becomes relatively poorer in terms of, shares of their wealth. So R is greater than T, and this is exactly basically explaining that why this happens. Now, this book also has 4 parts, and I want you to think of them like, the chapters of this book. So part one basically says that, part part one is basically about the income and capital, like what is income, what is capital, and how do we measure the ratio between them. So it is, very basic foundations. Part two basically walks you that, how this ratio between capital and income has changed over, hundreds of years. And here you will see that the data is very, very interesting. And you will be very amazed in, seeing the data which is explained in part two. Part three of this book is basically about how is income and wealth is distributed among people and who gets what. Basically, this is the question of part three. So how much do the top 1% have versus the bottom 50%? So it's very interesting, and how we go from one extreme to another extreme in the 20th century. The last part, which is the part four of this book, is explaining that why should governments do about this. It is basically more like policy recommendation part of this book, and obviously the policy recommendations, some are very practical, and some he himself, the author of the book, which is Piketty, he himself calls utopian in nature. So, but they are all very interesting. So, part one is basically, the crime scene, and part two is basically the timeline of how this crime has happened. Because, making people richer who are already richer is no less than a crime, in the words of, this book. So, part three is basically who gets hurt out of that crime, and part four is like, what you can do about it. So, let's start. Um, Piketty basically starts with big questions that economists have been arguing about, for 200 years. It's not just 200 years, I believe it is, something that has been into economics since, the book of Adam Smith came. It is, the core of the economics, and we have been already discussing these big questions. But the way he has analyzed, the data, and he has, found out the evidences makes this book's really important to read. If you talk about Karl Marx, even Karl Marx said that capitalism will always concentrate wealth more until the workers will revolt. So he was writing that in the 1800s, looking at the terrible conditions of, the factory workers or the labor workers in England. So yesterday we actually, celebrated the Labor Day as well. So Simon Kuznets, which is an American economist, as you know, and if you have read this theory of Kuznets curve as well, you can relate. So Simon Kuznets basically have also said that inequality first goes up during the industrialization and then comes back down as the economy matures and workers get education and they are much organized. So he looked at American data. It said that, the things will eventually improve. And, if there are some episodes in which, your economy is not performing well, then that is just, episode. But in the longer run, the things will improve and you will achieve a better rate of growth. But Piketty says that both of them were partially right, which means if he's saying that they are partially right, but it also reflects that some part of their conversations is not what Piketty agrees to. So the reason why he says that Karl Marx and Kuznets are partially right and not fully right is because they say that they did not have the enough data, because Marx did not know what would happen in the 20th century. And Kuznets only looked at America from the period of 1913 to 1950, which is a very unusual period of wars and high taxes. So, I always relate, these books with the Pakistani context because, you need to understand the theory, you need to understand basically the things that have been said in these books, but you should always relate, with experiences in Pakistan, like what do we get practical from this book. So, the for Pakistan, the big question is very relevant, that will economic growth rate automatically reduce the gap between, the elite and the laborers? Or do we need some active policy? And Piketty answer is again very clear that growth alone is not enough. So you need some deliberate redistribution. Otherwise, the feudals, the rich class, the people who are the people who are owning the wealth, they will just keep getting richer and richer. So part one basically is income and capital. And Piketty spends, the first two chapters just making sure that, everybody who is, the reader of this book understands, the basic vocabulary for this book. And this seems, sometimes boring because it is actually quite, descriptive in nature, but it is actually very important for you to read because these concepts, get misused all the times in economics. If you talk about national income, capital, the ratios between them. So once you understand these three things, everything else in this book, will become, much clearer to you. So, if you think of national income as the total income of Mr. Pakistan, as I always used to say, is basically it is basically what the country earns in a year, from you can say from farming, from factories, from services sector, from remittances. But how do you take it in the 21st century is important. Who gets the major share of income is the question. And capital is just like, the total asset that Pakistan owns. For example, it could be the land, building, factories, some kind of foreign investments. But even, some, sorry, so even, some kind of machinery that Pakistan owns. So the ratio between these two is what, Piketty will attract you to understand, what's going on in the 21st century. And basically, the ratio between these two, the national income and of course, the capital is basically what Piketty will discuss in this book, and he has the data of these two figures along with some other important figures for over 300 years. And you will see that it goes up and down, in the history, just like, in different cycles. So, very basic, but let's discuss, because, you hear the word GDP everywhere in Pakistan in your classes, and, for a PhD student, GDP is, nothing new. But GDP is actually not the most useful number for understanding, the people's life. So GDP counts everything that is produced inside Pakistan's border, but it does not subtract, the wear and tear of on our machines and roads and buildings. And this is what we call as depreciation. So every year, our factories get older, our roads, our are basically require some repairs, and our equipment also wears out. So the cost is about 10% of GDP every year of this depreciation, and it needs to be replaced because we can say that we are not actually earning anything new. So just the maintenance cost is the depreciation cost. Now the second issue is that if the foreign companies, such as you have a Chinese firm, and that Chinese firm has a power plant in Pakistan, and it is sending profits back to China. That output shows up in Pakistan GDP, but the income actually goes back to China. So national income corrects for this. Pakistan's national income is basically, as you know, that GDP minus what we pay out to foreign investors, plus what our own people earn abroad. And the remittances angle is interesting for Pakistan again because Pakistani people who are working in Saudi Arabia or in different parts of the world, they are sending back, over $30 billion a year. So that is, the income that is flowing into Pakistan from outside its borders. So it boosts national income above what, the GDP shows. And this is a good thing for Pakistan's national income calculations as well. So, all of this is important to understand, how national income is different from GDP because national income does give, a broader look on, the wealth of the nation. So, what exactly is capital? Because, according to Piketty, this sounds like a very simple question, but economists has, a fight about what is capital, and this has been a constant fight. So Piketty gives a very clear definition of capital. He says that capital is everything you can own and sell in a market. So land is a capital, your house is a capital, your shares in the company are capital, a factory is a capital, your savings in a bank account are capital. Even, a patent or a brand name is also a capital. So all non-human assets that can be owned and exchanged on some market, that is capital. But what is not capital is basically your skills, your education, your brains. This is not capital. So in economics, basically, we call this as human capital. But Piketty says that, look, you cannot sell yourself permanently. You can rent out your time as a job, but you cannot be bought and sold like a piece of land. So he excludes human capital from his definition. And only in slavery can human beings be the capital. And we will come to that while we discuss the case of America in this book. So for Pakistan, this think about this, like the biggest form of capital in Pakistan is agriculture led. So millions of acres are owned by the feudal families in different parts of or the different regions of Pakistan. So then there is, commercial real estate, such as, some DHA plots, shopping plazas. This is also capital. Now then there are businesses such as, textile mills, some kind of cement factories, banks. And then there are financial assets as well, such as, shares, bonds, or savings. And Piketty's framework captures all of this as capital. So public capital means things that the government owns, such as, PIA, Pakistan Steels, the canal, the Lahore Canal, the roads, the power infrastructure, everything, is included in the definition of Piketty's capital. So he says that the national wealth is basically a sum of private wealth plus public wealth. And the national capital is basically the sum of domestic capital plus, some net foreign capital. So the first fundamental law of capitalism, which he puts in this book, is this one. Let's understand it. So alpha is basically what fraction of all income in the country goes to owners of capital rather than the workers. And beta is how large the total stock of capital is compared to the annual income. Okay. And R is the rate of return on capital. So if you imagine Pakistan's total income in 100 rupees per year, the total capital stock, such as, all the land, building, factories, and share, is worth 600 rupees. So beta is 6. Even the average return on all capital is 5% per year, which means that the capital owners collectively would earn 30 rupees per year. So 30% of all income goes to the capital owners, and 70% goes to the worker. And that is basically the alpha, which is equal to 30%. Now, you might say in Pakistan that do capital owners really get those 30%? And actually, they probably get even more. For your, interesting part is that they actually get even more than those 30%, because Pakistan's tax system is a little bit weak, and there is a lot of informal economy. Feudal lords do not even pay the agriculture income tax fully, and the effective returns on real estates are also very high. So the real alpha in Pakistan is likely higher than 30%, which means, the workers are getting less than the 70%. So this formula just gives you a clean way, to think about it, that what is basically, going on. Then there is another thing that is mentioned in this book, which is, okay, sorry, yes. So, which is that, in rich countries like today, so for even, $1 of income the country earns in a year, it has $5 to $6 of capital sitting there in the form of homes, businesses, and financial assets. And that is what, beta equals to 5 to 6 means. So here, this 5 to 6 times, which is the typical beta range, explains this. So France, so let's assume, the France annual national income is about 2.5 trillion euros, and the total wealth of France, which is, which includes obviously the land, building, share, saving, everything that I have discussed before, is about 12 to 15 trillion euros. So 6 times the annual income. In Pakistan, again, we do not have precise data this way, but rough estimates would suggest that Pakistan's total capital, which is mostly the land or the real estate, might be around 4 to 5 times our annual national income. So our beta is also quite high, and it is driven heavily by the enormous value of agricultural land and urban poverty. The interesting thing is that how unequal this capital is. So in France, the capital is somewhat, spreading across the population. So many French people own their home. They have their savings, they have their pension funds. And in Pakistan, the capital is extremely concentrated. So a few thousand families basically owns the majority of the land, the major companies, the urban real sector, the rest of the population has little or nothing. So the same beta number hides a completely different social reality. In rich countries today, capital is split about half and half between the housing and the business or the financial end. But in France or UK, about half of the total wealth is people's homes and residential property. The other half basically is the stock and the bonds and machinery and factories that basically drive the economy. But here is a very, fascinating historical point that in 1700s, capital was mostly the agriculture land. So 60 to 70% of all wealth was farmland. So that made sense as well, because, the 70% of people worked in agriculture. So as industrialization happened, agricultural land became less important and factories and financial assets basically took over. So this is very, striking thing again, because even though the composition has changed completely, the total value of capital, which is relative to the national income, has stayed about the same, which is around 6 times income. So different types of capital, but same, the total amount. For Pakistan, again, this the comparison is very striking, because we are still in the early stages of this transition. Agriculture land is still an enormous part of total capital in Pakistan, probably you can say around 40 to 50%. And in the 1800s, Europe, that was also the case, is similar to that. We are essentially at the economic stage that Europe was at 150 years ago in terms of capital composition. So, which also means that we are at a stage where feudal land-based inequality is the most damaging. These numbers are for, the rich countries like France and Britain. And the average person there earns about 30,000 euros per year and has about 180 um, 80,000 euros in total wealth, which is, the 70% of incomes, comes from work, while 30% comes from capital. If you just, try to relate it to Pakistan, average income per capita in Pakistan is about somewhere to $3,000 to $4,000 per year, which may be, 350,000 rupees per year. But the average means nothing if the distribution is widely unequal, and it is in Pakistan. The top businessmen in Pakistan, the ones who own, the cement factories, the bank, the sugar mills, are earning returns on their capital that dwarf what any salaried person can save. Textile mill owners will earn profits that compound, year after year. And a feudal land will collect, rents on thousands of acres. So meanwhile, people like those who are, in the middle class and in the lower class, their saving accounts earns maybe, just 8% in bank. But after inflation of 13 to 20%, that is actually negative real return. So the key insight here is that the averages lie. The average Pakistani has a moderate capital, but the median Pakistani has almost no capital at all. A small home, if lucky, may have some savings, and that may be, as less as nothing. So all the capital that raises the average is sitting with the top 2% of families. I will quickly explain it because after 5 minutes, this meeting is ending. So I will just move to part two of this book. Uh, okay. Yes. So at the global level, there is some good parts as well and some bad parts as well. The good part is that the gap between rich and poor countries have been narrowing, especially because of China and India, which is growing very fast, and China has lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty in 40 years, and this is the most remarkable economic achievement in human history. India is also not far behind, but there is real. So this basically these both cases shows that there is real convergence that are happening. But the bad part is that this convergence is not automatic in nature. It has happened because China had very specific policies, such as post saving technology, technological imports. They have massive infrastructure investments and a disciplined state that has actually executed that plan. So institutions got better in China. And it did not happen just because the markets were free. There were, some strong policies as well and some strong, uh, chances that China took. For Pakistan, this is very relevant because Pakistan has been stuck in low growth trap for, decades, and we have not had, consistent growth above 6% for more than a few years at time, not even 5%. Our target is always to reach at least 5% of growth rate, but unfortunately we are not able to achieve that. So because the institutions that enable the sustained growth, such as property rights, the quality education, the reliable electricity, the political stability, all these institutions are weak in nature. So Piketty would basically say that without addressing these inequalities in capital, you cannot build those institutions. And the feudals and the industrialists who basically benefits from the status quo will block, these kinds of reforms. Um, Before I move to the next slide, um, you might go back to Africa's point, which is, chilling for Pakistan too. Because, foreign capital earns income from developing countries and it sends back home. So this is happening in Pakistan too, foreign companies like, Chinese back investments and international banks, they earn returns and they basically, earn profits. And the net flow of capital income often goes out of, the developing countries and basically not in. So now we are ending into part two, which is, the heart of book. But let's have another Zoom link for that. So this ends the part one of the book.